Okay, we'll just give it another couple of minutes. We've had some good registrations, so we'll just give them some more time. You're generally finding it in your experience. I'm finding more and more that people are registering, they're recording, and they're getting, and then watching it later on at their time, rather than fill up their days. And then you get the feedback down the track. Hey, that was pretty cool, but I don't agree with what you said. I don't know why they always want to challenge me. I didn't say half the things.
So definitely, if you've got to deal with homeschooling at the moment, having that flexibility to watch it, after all the kids are out playing is much helpful.
Yeah, a few more people just jumping on board, which is great. As soon as the clock there goes 9:01, let's go. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. My name is Brian Hay from Cultural Cybersecurity, and I'll be your host this morning as we explore this I think it's a fascinating and very interesting issue of cybersecurity and safety, the importance of properly manage your phishing simulation program and maximising your return on your investment, something I think doesn't get a lot of airplay time, thought, or consideration. We have a stellar panel of experts here this morning, of people with great experience in this area that'll hopefully try and answer the questions and guide the conversation, so we give you what you hopefully were listening to. I know time is short, and so we truly do appreciate you giving up time in your day to share it with us this morning. I would like to acknowledge DriveLock as one of our sponsors for this event, and also the support from Barracuda Networks to provide the esteemed Tom Ferguson to share time with us this morning. Thank you, Tom, for coming along.
Welcome.
And, always brilliant from a client perspective, Eagers Automotive, and the mercurial Mark Nix, Cybersecurity Manager for Eagers, and I'm an alleged just been rumoured man of many talents. So thank you, Mark, for sharing your time this morning. And my wonderful patient partner in cultural cybersecurity, Dr. James Carlopio. Thank you, James, for coming along this morning. So, gentlemen, let's have a bit of fun with this. And I just want to make a statement, and then I'm going to bombard you with a heap of questions. As you know, there are no rules. Now, folks, please submit any questions you would like to have asked of the panel via the Q&A. And if we don't get through all of those questions by the end of the session, we will address them and you'll receive emails afterwards. We'll also make a recording of this session, and that too will be provided to you all afterwards. So, many organisations around the country have invested in a variety of phishing simulation platforms, but how many are fully utilising their investment and extracting maximum return for their organisation? Are they using the metrics? Do they understand the value that this tool could be? And are they interpreting those metrics into actions, behaviours, and ultimately cultural programs? How many are not even feeding them to any sort of activity whatsoever, or is it a compliance regime? So if I ask the question, gents, how important is it to have the capability to run phishing simulations? Who wants to go first?
I'm happy to kick it off. I'll say I think very important. It's one of those pieces of a broader cybersecurity program, which I think provides a huge amount of value to your staff, giving them the ability to be exposed to all the different styles and types of threats that they're going to face, so that they can then understand and learn the correct detection techniques, the correct way to handle those different styles of threats is really, really valuable. And then the key piece of that is feeding those metrics out, as you've almost just said, to know who's failing to then, 18 months down the track, correctly identify some of those threats.
Right, so we had a new Tom Ferguson's, I heard popped up there. On that point then, do you think most organisations understand the value that a phishing simulation can bring?
Possibly not. I mean, some of them, sort of as we're leading to here, may not actually be looking at the metrics or outcomes from some of this. They may be doing it, but then after the simulation's gone through, after their staff have reacted, I'd say that a larger majority are not taking that data and then actually enforcing some sort of positive cultural change in the environment. I mean, many of the platforms being deployed do have the ability to, naturally lead into training if someone does accidentally click on something they shouldn't have. But there's a lot more around the whole approach that needs to be included there. And particularly where you're having broad failures, a style of threats failing to be detected by a lot more than one or two people in the business. You need to take those metrics and start applying different approaches to help boost the level of education around those threats.
Okay. Mark, you've been using, phishing simulations for some time. Do you have any sort of idea or reflection of what Tom was just saying?
Yeah, look, I found our experience has been a positive one. What it has done significantly for our organisation is raise awareness of the importance of being vigilant on emails and things like that, and phishing emails generally. And we've used it to, improve the communication with our own organisation, our own security department as well. So we've used it as a device to also promote ourselves, and so that they know who to contact when something goes wrong. And over time, they've become very used to this approach. There's no real sort of kickback, whereas initially there was a little bit of a pushback, I suppose, in terms of running these things.
Do you think some organisations have sort of ostensibly relied upon phishing simulation platforms and their integrated training to be their sole source of training for organisations?
For us, I guess we've started out that way, but then we've sort of branched out further into other online training, and also we had some face-to-face training prior to COVID, and our intention is to go back to that as well. I think it has to be an all-encompassing approach. I don't think you can just have one thing that you can rely on in this space. And if you want to change culture, you've got to do it from the top down, and you've got to have that that support from your upper management, from your leaders. And we're very lucky where we are at Eagers that we do have that.
And James, you're a teaching professional. You've been in universities as a leader of education practices and developing programs. What's your thoughts? I mean, just on what Mark said, should phishing simulation be the sole source of information for training?
I think, Brian, that you've got to hit people with as many different ways, as many different times as you possibly can. We are so overwhelmed right now, and learning is a difficult process. So, as you are well aware, and hopefully the audience can see the logic in this, why rely on only one of anything? And everybody processes information differently. Some people are raising their kids and homeschooling at the same time as they're working. Other people are retired. I mean, there's so much diversity out there. We have to really hit people with as many, in a positive sense, hit them with as many different options and ways as possible.
Because the reality is we all learn. I mean, I'm not teaching you to suck eggs, but in fact, we all learn differently.
Absolutely. There's just different various models, but the most obvious ones, some of you might recognize that you love to read things, and that's how you learn. Others love to listen to things, and that's how you learn. Others love to take stuff apart and try and do, and you're much more kinesthetic. There's all these different, so why rely on one thing? But something that's so important like cybersecurity, we've got to be hitting people regularly and communicating and educating many times in many ways.
Right. And Tom, is this something you see often where people, organisations are acquiring phishing simulation platforms just to tick the box and provide that training awareness that they think they need? So they say, great, we've got that. We're not too worried about the simulations, but we can do their annual online training now.
Yeah, it absolutely is. There's a lot of requirement to get some sort of cyber insurance, in case you do get ransomware or something like that these days, is that you've got some sort of training schedule going. And it is disappointing for me to see some people, purchase the product, use it once a year, if that, just to tick that box. I mean, we all know that if you're not, regularly exposed to training, recurring, ongoing, over and over and over, you naturally have this knowledge fade. And it sort of makes it pointless. You need to be doing it regularly, but that's just sort of some people's view of it, unfortunately.
So does that mean we actually have, in too many organisations, the hierarchy of the organisation, the executive level, the decision makers, the strategists, the enablers, not yet getting what we're trying to address here?
I believe so. Yeah, definitely. It's unfortunately usually it's the IT teams that are the initiating parties of this, when often I feel it probably should be more of an HR approach, or at least a combined approach with HR when it occurs.
It's an interesting point you make that, and I'll be interested in your views, Mark, and if we started out this journey and it comes from the IT department, sometimes, or the cybersecurity department, sometimes they're not recognised very well within the business. Sometimes it's not really understood what they do. Sometimes they talk in a language that they can't understand. And sometimes there's that so much of a cultural divide. And sometimes could it be that there's a power play that they want to grow their little empire, not that you would do that, Mark, and therefore keep everything because it makes them more important and they get more budget? Does any of that resonate with you, Mark?
I guess you could see that happening in some places. I mean, we did drive the adoption of these things at Eagers. However, having said that, we've always had because we started out relatively small, I guess we're in a unique position that we weren't seen as being an extra thing off to the side in the organisation, and we always were part of the change that was going on in the organisation, and I guess we were lucky in that respect, certainly at the executive level, to have that buy-in. And we did have an issue probably going back 5 or 6 years on an acquisition, and I think that sort of drove a lot of change in relation to security in this space as well. So they did see the risks involved, and once they're aware of the risks and they've actually experienced it, that's when you get a really good buy-in from the upper management and the leadership of the company.
All right, but I'm going to give you a pat on the back and a big tick, and then I want to go to James to ask how crucial this sort of decision is. But I am well aware that you made a quite a critical decision. Well, I'm going to say it's critical. In the early part, some years ago, when you particularly focused cyber awareness sessions for your executives, how significant do you think that was going forward for you?
Oh, that was very significant. And the reality was, to the way we did it as well, our whole approach was about ramming home to the general management in the company, how important this stuff was, and making them aware of the risks out there. And from a personal point of view, from a business point of view, rather than from a technical point of view, we weren't really focused so much on the technology, although that was an aspect of it. That was really, really focused on what can go wrong and what's gone wrong in the past. And guess what? This stuff happens, and this is what's on the dark web, all of those sorts of things. And I think that sort of laid the groundwork for a lot of the things that we've been doing in the security space from there on. And then, as you know, we started to get into other face-to-face type sessions, and then COVID hit, and then we're sort of blown out of the water. And what's been a critical thing for us during these COVID times has been the continual phishing simulations and the online training associated with that, and the Zoom sessions and all of those sorts of things, just to continue doing things.
Yep. James, if you want to build a cultural change program, to accelerate the efforts that you're investing in with cyber awareness and so phishing simulations, how critical is to get the support of the executives to accelerate that change?
There's not an adjective to describe how important it is. It's not going to happen without it, unless you're in some sort of magical situation where you've got this massive budget and you can do it without senior support, because culture is so interlinked with everything, with strategy, with structures, with processes, that when you pull that one lever, it's going to impact so many others. I love the earlier conversation saying that maybe we should start getting this to be an HR effort, and because if we look historically at how occupational health and safety went from not a concern at all 20 years ago to a mild concern 10 years ago to a serious concern in some places, that's the process we're going through with cybersecurity now, right? It's going to take a while to get into the business so that people realize it's not just this tack-on, add-on that these strange IT people do.
Any comment you'd like to make on that, Tom, what you've heard so far? Do you agree, disagree?
Absolutely. And what James is just saying, like the whole idea of then OH&S and HR and safety, and swinging that even further down to our kids, like the safety of our kids. Should we really be, some of this stuff should be the training we're really providing to, adults, needs to be coming down to kids too, earlier on. Grade 10, I think at the latest, to start teaching them what they're going to face as well. It's really not, broad enough in terms of who we're targeting these days.
So should platforms assimilate into their platforms? What I'm saying is, should we have training for the family, not just for the employees, that we make available to the broader environment?
I think that'd be so valuable if companies offered their own training out to the families of their employees. Like, what a great incentive.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah. It's interesting. I wrote an article on LinkedIn. It goes back to your point, James, probably about 18 months ago. And I said exactly that point. And especially through the accelerated application of remote access, such we've seen and endured with COVID, that we will see this will accelerate the migration of cyber safety into the occupational workplace health and safety paradigm. And therefore, if we've got people that are working from home and they are going to be targeted into getting into their organisations, I often talk about the fact that I expect, and I've seen it to some extent already, where crooks will start targeting the family members of the employee in order to get into the network. Has anyone seen anything like that yet, or do you agree or disagree?
I agree with your comments. I haven't actually seen it personally myself, but I think there'll be a lot of situations in a lot of companies, certainly with remote working, where, say, the kids or the missus, they'll be using, the family will be using the same device that the employee is using from time to time, and that's where your problems begin, I think, in those scenarios.
Because a lot of it, just to get people having access, went straight away to BYOD. I mean, at some stage you couldn't get a desk, you couldn't buy a printer, all the laptops were gone out of Harvey Norman and a lot of the retail stores. So organisations were forced to accept a BYOD arrangement. Okay.
We were very lucky we didn't do that, but
yeah,
we were very lucky, I think, and I think that saved our bacon a little bit, to be honest.
Yeah. So, sorry, James.
No, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt Mark and Brian. I saw something last month that I think is relevant to this that completely shocked me. One of the conversations I always have in my head when I hear this part of our conversation is that, well, the younger generation gets it. Why are we worrying about kids? They're so tech savvy. They got the download when they were born. If you don't know what to do with technology, give it to a 14-year-old and they'll fix it. Well, I did a presentation as part of a course I run on starting your own business, and I do this little. You're familiar with the video, Brian? The little the Dave video, where they show how easy it is to do some scraping and collect information from. And the kids, I'll call them kids because I'm so old and they're so young. They had never thought about this. They were flabbergasted that anybody could so easily collect information about their lives, and they have no clue. So I'm sorry, they did not get the cybersecurity download when they got the tech savvy download when they were born. It's just something we have to, as Tom said, year 10, year 12, year 6, I don't care. I mean, people are playing with technology as youngsters now, and we need to protect them.
Yeah. Okay, so that's an interesting point, embracing the family, getting our kids involved with and basically maximising the investment for what you're paying to perhaps ways we haven't viewed before, because if you've got a compliance mentality, there is so much more that can be achieved beyond that. Now, I'm going to share an anecdote. I know, and this has happened more than once, where I've gone into organisations and they have not wanted to embrace a phishing simulation platform because they tried it some years ago. And some of the bosses were horribly embarrassed because they got stung. And the environment was very much a disciplinary approach. If you clicked on a link, you must be stupid, and therefore you're going to be castigated, humiliated, and disciplined. And of course, if the boss got clicked after they made these rules, it sort of, it wasn't a great look. Do you think the reluctance perhaps by some organisations today is a consequence of that poor adoption in the earlier years? Tom, do you see or have a view?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it definitely would have been that way, back in the day. the evolution of everything, geez, just in the last 5 years, everything's flipped on its head and changed so much. I think the platforms, that we use these days to deliver this stuff have moved away from that. They've moved more to the idea of, positive reinforcement as opposed to negative, and, beating someone with a stick if they get it wrong. But the thing is now, with the platforms as well, they're able to deliver such a broad range of or styles of threats that you can't really punish anyone anymore for not picking up a threat, because in the cybersecurity world, the array or the styles of stuff they're going to be faced with is so unbelievably broad that someone may not detect something, you can't really beat them with the stick, but I bet you there is still a fair in there from things in the way that were done. I agree.
Have you struck anything like that, Mark?
I think in pockets, definitely. Culturally, certainly in the automotive retail industry, that is kind of a thing, a disciplinary approach. And funnily enough, because we had a major acquisition a few years ago, just before COVID, and that side of the business, they've had to come a lot further than the other side, since we already had the platforms in place previously. So they had to get used to and understand that, you're not going to get into trouble, blah, 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 sort of thing. So partly that was also going out. We've got like a newsletter that goes out as well, as you're aware, and all of that sort of stuff. They've had to get used to the new culture, essentially, and the new way of being, and not to be afraid to raise a hand to say, hey, I accidentally clicked on something, and so forth. Because you want these people to come to you and say, hey, I saw this email, I haven't clicked on it, but there's this problem, or I've clicked on it, because we want to be able to deal with a problem straight away before it becomes an absolute disaster, right? So the worst thing you can do is teach people not to put their hands up when they've made a mistake,
It's funny. Sorry, I'll keep going. Sorry.
No, that's what I was just going to say. Like, and also with the simulations, we tend to go through a short, sharp, this is what you did wrong, blah, 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 blah. Keep a lookout, try and be vigilant, etc. We're here to help. This is how you contact us, rather than, you're in strife, etc., and all the jackboots come in.
It's interesting. You just wonder how much people that scarring process has caused a detriment for moving forward today, because we go into organisations and we do cultural diagnostics, and we interview, generally a nice parcel, about 30 people, and you explore their attitudes, perceptions, behavioural norms, self-efficacy, and blah, 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 blah. And we like to go in and ask them and look at the attitudinal issues around phishing. And there was one organisation that we did some time back there, and this is reasonably typical what we find, but 70% of the cohort that we interviewed had experienced a negative cyber event. However, only 50% of, only half of those 70% ever shared their experience. And therein lies one of our failures. And I think maybe phishing simulations and the platform and generating a positive reinforcement and more of a reward-based thinking might be a conduit to sort of helping to raise that voice in a positive way for the benefit of a broader community, their families, and of course their colleagues and the organisation that helps them pay the bills every week. And one of the other interesting aspects, and this is absolutely consistent every time, and when we take this back to the management team, they tend to be shocked, is that 90% of people inside these organisations want to improve their phishing detection skills, and not by a small margin. I'm talking a rating of 10 out of 10. 90% will rate it 10 out of 10. They definitely want to improve their phishing detection skills. And then we ask them, well, how many phishing simulations would you like to be approached with on a monthly basis? The most common is 2 to 3 phishing simulations per month. One organisation in particular was 4 to 5. So there's this perception that they don't want to be hassled, they don't want to be embarrassed. And I think I can only help but think that is part of that legacy from the early adopters of this approach. But the fundamental reality is people, the employees, want to acquire those skills. Tom, do you see anything like that with Barracuda?
Yeah, absolutely. I think part of the cause of that was the really fast emergence of ransomware. Like, look, whatever it was, 10 odd years ago, where you went from, I click something, I get a virus on my PC. It's just my PC that's affected. It's not a huge, real negative effect. Extremely quickly turned into, I've clicked something and destroyed the whole company for 2 days. And those sorts of events, the person who did that was absolutely scorned. They were beaten up. Everyone was staring at them, and it was an awful experience for them. And I think that's where it really sort of started from. And it's probably led now to the idea that people know now that that is what can happen, and want to learn and want to change. So it's good that people are saying they want to get that, that many times a month. And I can only, I could pray that, all businesses have that same approach and get to that point, because that would really give, 4 or 5 times a month is a really good amount to be exposing all your staff to different styles of threats, that they may face, not just on their corporate devices. Send them to their home, their mobile phones, their kids' mobile phones. Do voice calls, ring them up, see what happens, that sort of stuff as well.
Okay, I think James, if there is an acceptance or the realization that too many phishing simulation platforms have been used by organisations in a compliance manner, any advice to security managers out there is perhaps how they can start to challenge that compliance mentality within the business?
Oh, great question, Brian. That's a real tough one, and we deal with that all the time. We think about culture as the least mature way is just where people react here and there willy-nilly, then they move into compliance, which is great. But if they get stuck there and don't move further on into continuous improvement towards high performance, they can get stuck. And it is so hard because it's easy to measure, we tick the box. So yeah, how do you get people to move out of that? Well, you have to start to create, and we've already heard that, Tom's mentioned it a couple of times, Mark has, we've got to get out of we've got to get the fear out of there, because the underlying emotion that's usually associated with people in a compliance culture is fear. I'm afraid to not tick the box. I'm afraid to not follow the rule because I will get in trouble, get yelled at, get embarrassed, et cetera, et cetera. So you've got to start by breaking that down. And goodness, it's 10 to 1. You get smacked once, you got to do 10 nice things before you forget the smack. So it's a hard, long road. So what you do is you start building trust, and there's no one right way to do that. But you use the carrot, not the stick, and slowly over time, people will start to realize, yeah, I can come to these people, I can learn, and those are the words we use. It's about learning, it's about failing forward, not trial and error. It's, I made a mistake and now I learned, and I'll never make that mistake again. And I loved hearing what Tom and Mark talked about earlier, that the criminals are getting so complex and so sophisticated that there's no shame anymore in getting caught. The only shame in is getting caught twice. Right? Everybody's going to get caught, but don't be so stupid and make the same mistake twice. So
I can't help but think that one of the challenges going forward is to, and I think it's going to be a real challenge for some areas, is to get beyond that compliance. So I think I would encourage people to start thinking early, because what we're seeing is an increased regulatory environment. And whilst I've been expecting this before now, I can assure you. But if we look at Australia's 2020 security strategy, if we look at the critical infrastructure amendments bill around cybersecurity, and you can see the government is either moving forward with starting to move forward with a regulatory framework. ASIC is looking to move forward. We've got APRA introduced CPS 234, and the burden just to try and be accountable for all these different things with scant resources, tight money, compliance becomes the floor. And let's just get compliant first. But what happens too readily is compliance, of course, becomes the ceiling. So, I think it's really critical that organisations start to, as they bring this in, and I think any organisations that introduces a phishing simulation platform has acknowledged the right step to a point, but it's probably been championed by the cybersecurity team. It's important that how do we divest that championship thinking more broadly across the business. as a consequence, and you touched on it before, and that goes to this regulatory framework, and you said it was being forced, you've seen in organisations because they couldn't get cyber insurance policies, Tom, because if they didn't have certain things in place. And if we expand that out into the family environment, into the broader community environment, could it, and let me throw this one out, could it expand into the member environment? Could it expand into the client environment, the customer environment?
Yeah, that's a really hard one to address. Like, you can't, like, the idea of sending simulations to your customers if they sign up to your services, right? There's a whole lot of legal issues with doing that. Our platforms don't let you send to things other than your own, owned domains and networks. And I think that's difficult, but I definitely think there's a path to provide training. Take any of the big banks, Westpac, NAB, you've signed up to a credit card. They email and say, as part of your plan for your credit card, we offer you, an hour worth of training on how to prevent cyber, fraud around credit card use online and things like that. There's definitely more an avenue for this stuff to be delivered. Whether it's through simulations, though, I think that's the real question, because I think there's too many sort of legal issues to navigate there.
Well, yeah, but anything can be navigated. It's just about want and will. Just changing tack. How, in your opinion, how often should phishing simulations be conducted?
Most of the people I talk to who are only just starting the journey, I say absolute bare minimum once a month. Any less than that, the knowledge is going to fall out of their heads. It's going to be pointless. So if you can do it every fortnight, for most, particularly if you've got a smaller team to run the system or to do things for you, perfect. So at least every fortnight or at least every month. Any further than that, it's almost sort of like, why bother? If you're only doing them twice a year, probably going to have very little cultural change in the environment.
Or even awareness level change, right?
Yep, exactly.
Would you agree with that, Mark?
Yeah, I do. We do it monthly. And one thing I did want to point out, because we're still a small team, right, where we are. So we have that service provided to us. So we do a QA on the sorts of things going out, but we pay for a team to actually manage that process for us, because there's no way we could find the time just to continually put those things together and push them out, et cetera, because there's a fair bit of work involved in ensuring that those templates are up to date and they work, etc. So I would recommend to anyone that is considering phishing simulation to look at a service rather than just a platform and going forward. But yeah, certainly monthly is the way we go, and it's we do 2 to 3 every month, different emails. We don't have a platform that does SMS at the moment, and again, that's one of those things. Perhaps in the future we will, but we would only target corporate phones if that was the case, because of the legalities around BYOD and all that sort of stuff, where we'd be a bit scared to get into that space, I think, at the moment.
You raise a really interesting point on the SMS, and I think the amount of people getting belted with phone solicitation or phone calls. So we've got the phishing and we've got the smishing. And the other thing that I think, I suspect, crystal ball stuff here, and I was talking to someone just this week, that it wouldn't surprise me if we see a resurgence of the USB drop. You think about it, if the crooks are targeting individuals as they are, and we know they're permanently now working from home. And we saw a couple of years ago where infected USBs were delivered into mailboxes in homes in Melbourne. What if the crooks became so targeted that they actually delivered the USB in a parcel to someone's home, to the target employee's home? I don't think that's ridiculous. So I know Barracuda, Tom, you've do a little bit of work around USBs, the SMSs, and I think that's really important, and I'd like to explore this one a bit further, especially in light of recent times of FluBot and of course phishing. How's that distinguish you, and how you find it in the client environment?
Look, I think the legalities sort of around doing it sort of become overwhelmed by the fact that I suppose the business's appetite for risk. There's so much risk posed in what they're going to be getting anyway. You may not want to send an SMS, phishing, whatever, to someone's personal phone, But I can guarantee you they're already getting them from malicious actors anyway. So you're better off accepting the fact that they may be unhappy with you doing that with them, but at the end of the day, they're your employee and enrolled as part of your cultural change program, and it needs to happen. I mean, the USB one's really interesting. I used to, be involved with customers with penetration testing and things like that done around their whole organization. And one of the most successful ways to get into heaps of businesses, they've got all these firewalls, all this protection deployed. You can't just break into the networks. Just walk in there, past the front door, and throw a USB down the hallway. Probably an hour max until someone's plugged it in. It's definitely the way to do things. And I would not be surprised if you see it happening more. Even walking through a shopping center and dropping on the ground, guaranteed they'll be plugged in within an hour.
I'm not being offensive, but you could, especially if you put a label that was on the side of the USB that was going to get someone's curiosity, it would just excite them a little bit, the behaviour a little bit more, I would suggest.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's as sort of touched on at the start, it's about the different styles of threats that people face. So the idea of doing a USB with an Excel document, they have to open that, they have to click to enable macros before it does anything, teaching them that going through that process, they've just made several bad decisions, right from plugging it in through to there, just to see what may have been someone's salary figures or whatever you've, tried to entice them with, you know what I mean?
Mm. And I think, with the USBs, we know we're getting more scam phone calls. We know we're getting FluBot was a great example of how clearly, and to me, it's like a parallel universe that occurred nearly 20 years ago. I'm showing my age, I can't remember, just say a long time ago. When we migrated to online banking, internet banking, we saw the advent of phishing emails. And it's been with us ever since. And it's still, I can't believe we are still so far behind in addressing that challenge, because the skills are fundamentally attainable, learnable, achievable, and that could make such a difference. And it blows my mind we have not taught our peoples, our kids, our families those skills. However, what we soon realised, and the bank soon realised to protect their clients, was you do not send them emails, unsolicited emails with embedded hyperlinks, because that was the foundation. And now we're seeing that behaviour ramp up with the crooks by sending out SMS messages, text messages with embedded hyperlinks. And we've seen that explode. And what disappointed me, I'm not saying, was some recent government SMS messages going out. And what did they do? They put a damn embedded hyperlink. So what we're seeing is basically we're starting to ingrain and condition the public to accept and click on links in embedded SMS messages. Am I being overly critical, or is this an issue that will be a future concern?
I think you have a point. Certainly with the recent government messages around vaccinations and stuff like that, it does sort of, to me, they should just promote the website without a link and therefore go to that. But I don't know, I think once you get over that one, there'll be some other thing as well, right? So there'll be something else around the corner that'll come up. And I think the benefit of phishing or simulated attacks is that it's certainly a good method to train people. And whatever those new methods might be, you could train those as well.
Yeah, and I think those new methods are already happening. We've banged it home now to everybody that multi-factor authentication is the best thing in the world. Even those things like MyGov were unfortunately released early days without any multi-factor systems or whatever available. So we're teaching people as well that, a multi-factor authentication SMS is a good thing. So then people is already getting SMSs saying, hey, this is your Netflix multi-factor authentication. Click here to approve. You click there and it pops up a Netflix login. Someone puts their password in and away some credentials go. So, they've already onto the fact that they can abuse what we're teaching people is the right way to do things. So.
Yeah, look, and we're always going to be in a constant state of reaction, constant state of evolution. But I think it's, I think someone mentioned before, it's what do you say, fail forward. Better to fail forward than not do anything and maintain a completely reactive state. Just one question here from Belinda. What are the information privacy implications for an organisation sending phishing simulations to staff on their personal devices? Does the organisation need to seek approval or need to highlight the intention to staff prior to seeking the simulation? Well, we've got no sort of legal people on the panel. I'm happy to have a crack at that first. There may be employee conditions that allow training to be extended. You can always go on the safe side. What I would actually do on that, Belinda, is I'm a big advocate for announcing to the business we're running phishing simulations. The reason we're running these phishing simulations is our cultural diagnostics said 90% of you rate this really important, and we are listening to you. We also understand the threat landscape, and we understand that phishing is critical to protection of your family. Always make the messaging relevant and personal, so it becomes important to the person. And if we talk about cyber safety and cyber protection at home, that elevates that importance level to the individual. So by saying we're going to have some fun with this, we're going to embrace it with a reward program, and whatever, you can get as fancy as you like with that sort of stuff. And if there was a legal issue, get them to sign a consent form or opt out, so you know who you're dealing with and limit it accordingly. But we know that people want it. Any other comment on that, or contribute or challenge?
Potentially, you might have to get them to opt in, I think, these days. Yeah. But it's certainly something that I think you'd have to address, that privacy issue, because you don't want to send mixed messages about privacy either, because these people will be handling privacy of your customers and so forth as well. So you definitely got to be consistent in how you deal with it. And we would, in our organisation, we would definitely go on the safe side and contact them.
Yeah, it is, I think, as well useful there to have a platform when you're doing your simulations that has the option to provide anonymisation of results. To scrap all the personal details, just provide a figure. Say, this week we've got X% of staff who've accidentally clicked on this. This week it's lower to this percentage, but not actually report any personal results. And it takes a lot of that impact away from your staff.
Okay, so on that point, you're talking about the click rate, and the click rate's good, really important. What are the metrics that you see are the most important from your perspective at Barracuda, Tom? And then, Mark, I'm going to come to ask you the same question, but from a user's perspective.
I'll go with I suppose there's just two that I think are really good to provide a comparison against each other. One of them is the click rate, and the other one is the number of people reporting, or the instances of reporting, because you want to see them go both the opposite way. You want to see your click rates effectively drop, and you want to see the number of people reporting what they think are phishing emails or they think are a threat increasing. Even if they're not a threat, the more that have been reported as they think might be a problem, the better, really. So if anything is a single figure that's most important, I'd say it's the stuff that people are responding to and say, I think this is a problem.
So, Mark?
No, look, I agree totally with what Tom said. We try for the lowest click rate possible based on our phishing simulations and the highest report rate. One of the things that we've had a problem with, I guess a bit of a problem in terms of accuracy, is really the reporting rates, because a lot of our staff, because we've built up these different methods to communicate to us, they may just send us a message to say, hey, I got this email, or they may ring us up and tell us about things rather than use a particular product to report the phishing email. So sometimes that's a little bit fuzzy, that number, but look, we calibrate as a result of that, and definitely we like to see the reporting rate go up and the click rate go down. And it's pleasing. The reporting rate to me says that you're making an improvement in terms of culture and how the people operate. And the click rate is telling you how good your education's going in relation to actually spotting the problems.
Okay, James, would you agree that if a member of the team, the staff, are reporting it back to the business as a proactive step, that's a reasonable metric for culture?
Oh, absolutely, buddy. You in organizations, you get what you measure and reward, right? People attend to the things you measure and reward. So yeah, it's a great indicator, and it just shows people you're serious.
Okay, Now, I want to go back to thanks, James, because I've been saying that that's the case. I wanted to be sure that I might be close to something being right. Tom, I just want to ask you, click rate, does there not need to be a sort of, if you're changing your templates every month, how can you compare the click rate at the beginning of the year to the end of the year? Is there a technique that you could use?
That's a really good point. And that's one of the things a lot of people don't factor in when they start doing phishing simulations is the difficulties of the templates used. You know, if you've got a 30-40% click rate on a really, really difficult template, yeah, how does that translate to a 10% click rate on a really basic template? So you have to compare your results in the right way. And it goes sort of about where this webinar started at the beginnings, talking about, are you using the metrics in the right ways? Don't do a comparison between a really hard and a really easy campaign in terms of simulation, because the numbers don't match. Don't mix differing degrees of, a phishing template in the one campaign, because that single campaign is then going to have skewed results. So understand what you're sending and the results that those are going to have. But I suppose then it leads on to the important point as well, that you need to make sure you use a broad array of styles of difficulties of templates. If you're just using difficult or just using simple, again, it's not going to have the right impact, the right outcomes. I've seen some amazingly complex, threats coming through to mailboxes recently. So you've got to do those, ones that lead out to, full replica pages that the staff are used to interacting with, see at what point they make the decision. But yeah, then go down to the really, really easy stuff that just says, hey, mate, can you help me with something? And that's it. See how people respond. That'll give you the best indication of how your staff are looking.
Right, but then you've got to try and analyse all that data for the end of the month report back to the board that our phishing detection skills are here and our risk has dropped or has it increased or what it may be. It's one of the things that we've looked at is from a cultural cybersecurity perspective and a PPT managed services perspective is running a quarterly campaigns every month, but within quarters, and keeping the quarter within a certain degree of difficulty. And then slowly over the course of the 12-month period, slightly increasing that difficulty. Now, what will happen is that as it gets more difficult, there will be more clicks. But by the end of the quarter, they'll have started to come down again. But each quarter, throw out one control email. It might be a different color, it might be a different brand, but fundamentally it's the same phishing email. And that's your control. So at least by the end of the year, you can say, this was our control. We've gone from a 19% click to a 6% click. This is the average with increased difficulty, and it's come from 34 and it's down to 23. Does that make sense to you? Or are we on completely the wrong path? And be careful how you answer that question.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. It's a good way to do it. I agree with increasing over time generally yields better results than going straight in with difficult templates and then up and down with the difficulties. Increasing over time is a better way to see a return on your investment or a better outcome to me.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Do you need comment on that?
No, I agree. I think that's the way to go. We have a unique situation in our industry where we have, we were having prior to COVID a 40% turnover in staff. So that's the only other thing to bear in mind. They are in the sales side, so you could kind of look at them separately anyway. Yeah. But that's one thing we always bear in mind in terms of where they start on the training.
Actually, you just made an extraordinarily good point. Should you actually carve that into a second campaign group because you have such high turnover, and therefore be more bespoke with the approach to different elements of the company organization?
That would make more sense, I think, longer term. Yeah, definitely.
And increasing difficulty, James, how important is to increase the difficulty in order to increase the learning moments?
Yeah, I think it's a great idea to go difficult, easy, medium, and keep that variable, because we get sensitized or desensitized pretty quickly, and they become routine. And it's like when you go out, you don't even see what's there anymore because it's just so familiar. So yeah, we need to keep the variation to keep our attention going. Absolutely, great idea.
One thing that we have experienced, and certainly as people have become more aware of these things, is we do also get referred legitimate emails, a significant amount of those to look at. So you got to find the right balance there as well, I think.
Yeah.
In the whole scheme of things.
And I think that's a good point. I've got a great question here from Nick. If an employee is found to be repeatedly failing phishing tests, at what point should more serious action be taken?
Yes, the serial clickers.
I was going to say the happy clickers.
Yeah,
I've got a view on this. I'd like to hear your expertise here coming to the fore, Tom.
Oh, look, I just want to say I've come across this quite a lot. Going back to what we were saying with having HR and other involvement in middle level sort of management in a business, when you do this sort of thing, I've had many IT team or security team be the the spearhead for this initiative and get to this point where they've got people who are repeat offenders and refuse to adhere, and then got to the point where they can't enforce it. And then they have to go to HR after the fact and go, we need help to try and deal with this person. And HR was never involved from the start. So it sort of gives weight to the fact that get HR, get the right managerial people involved from the very start, so that when you get to that point where they're repeat offenders, they know why and what needs to happen, and almost talk about that before you start doing it. If we have these people that refuse to, become part of our culture, then what are we going to do about them?
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, look, it's an interesting question, and I guess it really depends on every organisation how you deal with non-compliance as well as risk, I suppose. What we tend to do is we tend to raise it at a business level, and because we have a bunch of individual businesses out there remotely, and then they will deal with the individual themselves in the way that they deal with other similar types of issues. But one of the other things that we're looking at is having sessions, separate Zoom sessions, not large ones, but just 20-minute type sessions with those groups to try and see if another form of training might help them.
And I think that's a good point, because one of the issues to me, and James touched on this right at the beginning, said that so many people learn so many different ways. And if your sole basic primary point of delivery of their training information is an online module, and they're an older demographic, they're not comfortable with this, they learn so many different ways, maybe that's the importance of mixing the training up and giving them a bit of a cuddle first before any big stick approach. Does that make sense to you, James?
Absolutely, no doubt about it. And we I always think back to occupational health and safety. My mother's an older individual now living in the US, and she got into a little car accident and she got driver retraining. And if someone repeatedly doesn't follow occupational health and safety requirements, I mean, you have to have a risk profile, and you have to have severity metrics. And in certain work sites, if you go into the work site without your PPT, your personal protective equipment, you're fired on the spot, and there's no conversation. Now, we're not there yet with cybersecurity, but that's why Nick's question is great. We need to think about these things and start to draw some lines in the sand and mix it up and change it up. And
yeah. No, great point. And I think sometimes with the I'd certainly not being offensive, but the people that the multiple clickers or the happy clickers is that the system defaults to another online training module. Now, if the online training module by itself is the problem, you're really not helping. So I think to take them back as your suggestion, what you're looking to do, and Mark, and give them a cuddle and give them some face-to-face stuff and deliver the knowledge they need in a different way makes perfect sense to me. But what if, and I've seen this in one organisation, one example, where when they looked at this person's happy clicking, they found they were completely disengaged. The performance of the business unit wasn't that happy, and it was actually the reason why the whole unit was disengaged was because there was a very poor leader or small manager of the group, and as a consequence, they didn't give a rat's bum. And therefore, their performance as a unit was down, the morale was through the floor. So how do they fix that? They actually fixed they couldn't work with the manager. They didn't realise it went investigation. That person got put to the side. Guess what? Everything else lifted. So sometimes I think these metrics and these processes can reveal and be symptomatic of much, much bigger issues than what we perhaps ever thought possible.
Mm.
I don't know if you've ever seen anything like that, Tom, but
No, I mean, not that I've been told about. May have happened. They just haven't come back to me about it. But it certainly raises an interesting point, and it certainly makes sense that if there's a problem with the team's overall morale that's causing some of these outcomes, absolutely.
And the other one I've heard is the insider threat, where they're about to leave and they're happy to cause as much mayhem as they can before they depart, which is sad. But it's always going to be difficult. So I suppose this is a no-brainer. It's like a Dorothy Dix. I mean, has COVID exacerbated the need for phishing simulation awareness training? Because let's just accept the pendulum's not going to go back 100% where it was. We're going to have more remote working staff.
Absolutely. Have we got another hour? I could talk about the things I've seen for a long time. Like, firstly, the training approach. How do you train such a dispersed workforce effectively? When you can't, Zoom overkill. People get to the point where they don't want to sit, on learning sessions on Zoom. They want to learn other ways. They want it to be more interactive, different styles, games, things like that aren't the same way of learning, definitely. But then just the styles of attacks and threats. I've seen some really, really awful manipulative sort of extortion style attacks using COVID, saying, your mum's infected. If you don't quickly pay here, we're not going to give her the vaccine. Things like this, like awful approaches. So, I mean, it's not to be, I suppose, unexpected to see that occurring. But man, it's made a big, big, big impact to the whole threat landscape, in my opinion.
Well, I think it'd be remiss not to see that, to actually understand that they're crooks. They don't give a fig about how they make people feel, other than compromising them to get the credentials or identities, or of course their cash. And I remember one of the last matters I had before I left the police was a CFO in Brisbane received an email. And in this email attached was a photograph of his 5-year-old son. And the demand was, pay me, the 5-year-old son photograph came from the Facebook page for the record, pay me $5,000 or I will ruin the online reputation of your child for the rest of their living years. And I can see, with all the information out there, and James, you touched on the young people that have surrendered so much, there's no doubt in my mind that we will see more personalised, targeted attacks of a personal nature in order to destabilise the emotions, to evoke a very strong emotional response that then compromises the security of the organisation. Any views, Mark?
Look, it's a never-ending topic, really, isn't it? Where they go with this. The COVID, the way it's actually changed things, it's really accelerated the remoteness of everyone. We talk about simulations here, but we were scrambling with VPNs and all sorts of things to get people set up. So for the security teams out there, it's just been a very interesting ride, a rollercoaster ride, to be honest, with all of this stuff. It's taken away that face-to-face opportunity that we had. We were scheduled to have a face-to-face thing in New South Wales that we had to pull a pin on, within days. And we haven't been able to get back to it. So all of those sorts of things. So it's just been, I think what it's done is it's just increased the threat landscape massively, just in terms of volume. Like, it was always there, the remote landscape was there, but it's just increased the volume of it and the availability of it. So I think now, even in our workplace, there'd be like 20%, more than 20%, 30-40% of people would work at home at least, 2 days a week or something. So and that was unheard of previously. So,
So, gentlemen, we're coming near to the end of our time, and thank you for that question, Mark. That was great. I want to just give you quickly one last. I've asked the question: one piece of advice you could give to people about phishing simulations. What would it be, Tom? Would you like to go first?
There's so many, but I will say I had one recently where someone came in and said, we want to do some phishing simulations, but just for our top level executives. If anything I can say, pointless. Do it for everyone. Include everybody in the business in your program. no point in trying to change just one team. It won't have an outcome, and it's going to be someone else who gets compromised. So include everybody.
Thank you, James.
I go way back to the basics, Brian, and you know, you and I talk about this all the time, make it personal, relevant, and important. I don't think people are taking this seriously enough. I don't think we as a culture, in an Australian culture, as a world culture, as organization cultures, we just have to take this much more seriously. This is big, it's growing, COVID's exacerbating it, and we've got to catch up. They are just kicking our butts right now. We've got to get our butts in gear.
Okay, thank you. Mark.
Look, if anyone's considering phishing simulations, I seriously recommend they look at a service, a managed service. I have previously done it myself, and you just won't have time unless you're a massive security group with heaps of people working for you. It's just the only way to go.
All right, thank you very much, Mark. That was great. And on behalf of Cultural Cybersecurity, Barracuda, DriveLock, Eagers Automotive, thank you very much for surrendering up your time. To our delegates, thank you for surrendering your time. We will send you a copy of the recording. We're all in this together, dare I say, but I forget the COVID. We were actually using that phrase before COVID came along, so I'd just like to put that on record. But to me, it is all about a community spirit. It is all about what we can do. I stood on a stage at an international FBI conference many years ago, and I said, law enforcement needs to adopt a culture of a willingness to contribute to the global effort without expectation of return. And that same premise holds true for us as individuals, as family members, community members, and as organisational delegates. So I think we can all make a difference, and let's go forward with that intent. Have a brilliant day, and thank you very much for your time. Thank you. Thank you. All right, thanks, panel. Cheers.